I hope this podcast can inspire you to always dream big and make it your reality. I am your host, Jess Williamson, a serial entrepreneur and business coach. And today I have the incredible Kerrie Hess, an Australian-born illustrator who has worked with the likes of Cartier, Tiffany & Co, Louis Vuitton, Lancome, Net-a-Porter, and so many more incredible fashion brands. Kerrie's illustrations have been featured in Vogue as well as the cover of Harper's Bazaar. She has illustrated so many fashion windows, billboards, book covers. Kerrie has exhibited solo art shows in Paris, Melbourne, and Brisbane, and she is the creator of her own art prints and phone cases. Kerrie has lived in London, Hong Kong, and Paris, but she is now living in Brisbane, Australia. Today, we are chatting to celebrate the launch of her new book, Joy in the Little Things, which is illustrated by Kerrie. She shares with me in her interview that she has illustrated over 250 beautiful illustrations for this book, and she has had such an incredible career so far. So we are going to be chatting her all about her journey to get here. Let's get started. Hey, Kerrie, I am super excited to have you on today's episode of Couch Chats. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Amazing. So there are so many questions that I want to ask you, but what I would love to start with is, how did you get started? Now you're a world-renowned artist and everyone knows your name and, you've got such a beautiful signature style, but have you always loved art and creativity? Take us back to when it all began.
Oh, thank you for that intro. To be honest, I just always really loved painting as a child, and I always just thought that this would be my hobby. I really didn't think it would ever be a career. I used to paint on weekends and do art classes even from about 9. And it's just something that I always loved, and I ended up studying graphic design because I thought that would be leading to a real job and still very creative. So I enjoyed graphic design a lot. I worked as a graphic designer for 1 year and just ended up kind of falling into illustration. I think the world was kind of changing at the time, and I ended up illustrating a little spot in the magazine that I was working at. And this was in my first year as a graphic designer when I was living in London. And it ended up just going from there. It was a spot where a photo hadn't turned up that week, and it was a fashion story. And I just remember thinking and saying to my editor that, I could probably sketch something that would fill that space. It was about little black dresses, and it really just went from there.
That's incredible. So obviously graphic design is still quite creative, but I guess there's a lot more restrictions and usually it's done on the computer these days. How did you find that? Obviously working 1 year in graphic design, how did you go? How was that? Because I think a lot of people get stuck in the idea that if you love something, it has to be a hobby and that you have to choose something that's a little bit more commercialized. How did you find that journey?
Yes, well, as I mentioned, it kind of started out as it started out by chance. So really just that first illustration that I did in the magazine ended up leading to commercial work. Just with my little credit, it ended up leading to companies getting in contact with me. And, that really just led to working with businesses. So it kind of happened organically and unfolded organically. And, I took a chance and kind of saved up for a year while I was working as a graphic designer and just wanted to see whether I could work as an artist for a year. And I thought, if it doesn't work out, I can go back to graphic design. But that was about 23 years ago now. And really it's just, I've not kind of looked back too much, and I feel really lucky that I have managed to kind of move in this direction and stay with working as an artist.
Yeah, that is an incredible story. So it's kind of a mixture of right place, right time, but also the fact that you seized those opportunities as well. You know, you didn't just sit back. You came forth with ideas and put yourself out there. And so it's pretty well known that the art and fashion industries are pretty tough to crack. And obviously you got started with that one opportunity that you kind of jumped in when there was no image for that story. But how did you get started working with top brands such as Cartier, Tiffany, and so many more?
Well, the very first job that I ended up doing was with Vogue Australia, that was international. So back then I was still living in London, and I ended up couriering my work to all the different London brands that I was working with in my first foray into being an artist. But then I did end up getting an email from Vogue Australia, and they kind of mentioned, maybe you could email us the work that you're doing for a story that we're writing. And it was a fashion story, and it was really the first time that kind of technology had changed, and we'd started, if you can take your mind back this far, emailing attachments, so I could sketch up my work, scan it, and email it to a business or a company in another country. And that was a really new thing at the time, and
Wow.
it kind of opened up the opportunity to work with fashion brands in New York or beauty brands in France. And I felt like it was the right time to really give this a try. And I think it changed the landscape for fashion illustrators at the time.
Yeah, it opened up so much opportunity. So obviously there would be no social media at that time if attachments were just a new invention. So how did you get seen? Was it just that you were credited and these brands and these editors were seeing your work in other publications?
Yeah, I think back then it was really all about print media, because we didn't have so much digital media that we do today. So it was really a case of, if you did an illustration for Vogue and your credit was in there, that would end up leading to all these other jobs. Or if you did a job for a big fashion label and they gave you a credit, that would lead to all of these other jobs as well. And so, yeah, it was a really different landscape. Obviously, there are a lot more, opportunities in publishing back then. There's less of those now. It's a lot more digital. But, I feel like I've kind of just kept moving along with technology changing and the world changing. And I think that's, as an artist, that's something you just have to do. You can't kind of get stuck in one little niche because the world keeps changing. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's key with anything. If you sort of don't keep up or you aren't prepared to pivot,
yes,
then sometimes you get left behind. But what I really love about your art is that you still do it mostly by hand, where a lot of, artists or even graphic designers, there's a lot of incredible art programs that you can use on the iPads and things that look like watercolors. But there's such a magic about doing it by hand as well. And you've been able to use technology to, rather than couriering your artwork, get it out there, but you still seem to do most of it by hand. Is that right?
Yes, I do. And to be totally honest, I think in the very beginning I used computers a lot more, and I just realized how much I didn't enjoy that. I didn't enjoy the process of it. And as you say, there can be beautiful work as an outcome that's done on the computer, and, all art is art. But for me, just personally, I found that painting in an analog fashion just suits me a lot more. I don't love being on a computer all day. I really am in my happiest place when I'm painting with a brush and on paper. And I know that's kind of old-fashioned and maybe, a bit romantic these days, but for me, that's really where I get my most kind of happiness and enjoyment. And I think someone too who experiences a little bit of anxiety at times, which is something that I feel sometimes, I definitely find that painting is a real creative therapy, and I just don't get that feeling from a computer. So it's a win-win for me to paint in an analog fashion.
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, it's quite romantic, and I think it definitely has a different feel to it.
Yes.
Worked on that by hand. It's so beautiful. Obviously, people would sort of have a look at where you're at now and say, oh my gosh, you're so lucky, and look at all of the success you have. But as we both know, opportunities don't just tend to land on in our laps and you just sort of had an easy route. I'm sure there's been lots of ups and downs. So what did it really take? And you did touch on a little bit that you started this over 20 years ago now. So what have been some of the challenges along the way?
Yeah, I think that I have been lucky to have had parents that were really supportive of me pursuing art. I think I've been really lucky in that. But outside of that, I think, yeah, obviously it's just a lot of hard work, honestly. And it is also being a bit fearless and trying things where you think, I might fail at this, and it is putting myself out there and my work out there, but I'm going to do it anyway. And with that, there's so much learning that you have along the way, and I think that helps you grow as both an artist and as someone in business. But yeah, I think that's the main thing: not fearing failure and not kind of fearing hard work as well. That's a big part of it, and just swaying with the wind too. Obviously, the world keeps changing, as we talked about earlier, and I think it's really important to be open-minded to, especially with a micro business, you may be working on something and then the world changes and you get this opportunity to completely pivot and do something different in response to that. And I think sometimes that's the best thing about having a really small business, whereas, if you have a really big corporate brand, it's quite hard to make those changes really quickly. So, yeah, not fearing failure is the big one, I think. And, yeah, I do think hard work's a big part of it.
Yeah, definitely. Were there any times where you just thought, oh my gosh, Vogue is contacting me, who am I to be doing this? Did you ever suffer with any imposter syndrome, or have you always sort of just taken it in your strides and been super excited about those opportunities?
Yeah, I still suffer from imposter syndrome. I think that we all do to an extent. I think there's very few people that deep down don't have a little 5% of imposter syndrome inside them. But honestly, I think the more you do, the more you say yes to and you just do, the more you can kind of stamp it out, I think, although it never completely leaves you. It has never completely left me. But I talk to my, masterclass students about this all the time, not fearing perfection, not fearing, something not being perfect, because perfection is the thing that I think is the thing that stops all of us doing something we just want to try out. And I always say to my students in the masterclass, don't expect your work to be perfect. I don't expect my work to be perfect. And if you just go into something with that mindset, then you can lose a bit of that imposter syndrome and you'll just enjoy the process. And I think that's the big thing with art as therapy, for sure. But I think it's also important for someone who's working in a commercial sense as an artist, because you can get too in your head about it otherwise. You can be thinking, this is for Louis Vuitton. I'm so, overwhelmed by making sure this is perfect. And if you're thinking that, it definitely won't be. So it's better to just go in to every job with an open mind and just know you can redo it if you have to. There's no huge expectation. Just do the best job you can. And that's probably when you'll do your best work.
Absolutely. I think you touched on a few really key points there. I am coming to you mid-podcast episode to let you know that you can win your very own copy of Kerrie's newest book, joy in the little things, and all you have to do is screenshot this episode, share it to your Instagram stories, and tag Kerrie at Kerrie Hess Illustration, tag myself at Jess.Williamson8, and also our podcast Instagram account at Couch Chats Podcast. Good luck, and we will be announcing the winner in 2 weeks from the date this goes live, so make sure you get sharing, and the more times you share, the more times you will be entered as well. Good luck, and let's get back to the episode. Do you find with being in more a creative space, I sort of dabble a little bit in creative, but I'm definitely more on the logical side of things. But I have worked with a lot of creatives, and my partner is actually a children's book illustrator as well. And I find that creatives sometimes have, you know, it's almost a piece of you, every piece of art. And do you ever have a sense of when you put it out there, you get worried about what people might think of it? Or do you just think, I love this, so I'm going to put it out there?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it in that latter version that you just mentioned. I think as an artist, you have to just put things out there that you love and that you're happy with. And also sometimes document the things that aren't perfect. I mean, there's some things that I've posted on Instagram that are not my favorite things, but I've posted them anyway, or I didn't think turned out how I really wanted them to turn out. And they've been the most engaging pieces of art that I've ever posted. And it's really interesting. Sometimes it's okay to just put out there what you really like and not necessarily think is perfect, because you never know, you might find that your audience really loves what you've done, and may not respond as much to just the things you think are great. So yeah, I try and keep that in mind. But I think once you create something and put it out there, it's going to have a life of its own. And some of these things are down to algorithms and not necessarily down to whether it's a really lovely piece of art or whatever it is. So you've got to take the expectation out of it, I think, just for your own sanity as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think that's the same for every creative. You have to kind of just do the best work you can, keep showing up, and document what you're doing and show people your process and put it out there without expectation. And that's the best way. And just be pleasantly surprised if something really resonates, and if it doesn't, that's okay too.
100%. I actually read that you were interviewed somewhere else, and you mentioned that one of the first platforms that you pitched your artwork to, they told you that it was too feminine and not commercial enough. Did that sort of take you aback, or were you just sort of like, what are you talking about? I'm going to make this happen?
Yeah, that was actually one of the best things that's ever happened to me, if I'm totally honest. I'd just come back from living in Paris, and I had thought, I really want to create art prints, but I obviously will need a bigger, company that already does art prints to do them with me and to, let me know that my work is good. And I sent my work to a company that did this and kind of worked with artists on more of a royalty base. So they created the art print and sent them out on behalf of the artist. And, they got back to me and it was really crushing, actually. They came back and said, thank you for sending through your work, but we don't see any commercial opportunity for your work in art prints. And I was so crushed, honestly. I was really crushed reading that email, but it definitely gave me the kind of energy and inspiration to create art prints myself rather than through, a bigger brand. And I'm so glad that happened. I just thought, I'm going to create a really small capsule collection. I'm going to print them myself and pack them myself and just see what happens. And I think back at the time I don't even think I had an Instagram page yet, because I had just come back from Paris and Instagram was a bit late to come to France, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
I kind of discovered Instagram when I came back to Australia. And I think I had 2,000 followers on Facebook. And I just let that community, that little community, know about my art prints, and people just started buying them. And it was a real moment where I just thought, sometimes you can choose yourself as an artist. And that was also, I think, at the time when, e-commerce sites like Shopify and so on were kind of popping up as well. Again, technology is kind of popping up at that very moment, and it was possible to have your own store as a creative person. And yeah, it really went from there, and I'm to this day so glad that I was rejected in quite a harsh email by that company that I really admired. So
yeah, sometimes it's definitely a blessing in disguise, but I think some people, unfortunately, would have taken that as a message to give up. But I love that, there's two things that I sort of take from that is that, one, you believe in yourself wholeheartedly, and you believe that there would be people out there that love it as much as you do. And that's incredible, because something that I always share is it does start with mindset. And if someone was already possibly doubting that it was possible for them, they may have given up at that point. But you believed that it was going to be possible, and you said, let me just do it myself. And the second key thing that I think really resonates for me from that story is that you're the only one that's in control of your success. And so you took it back into your control. And like you said, it was the best thing that ever happened, because now you've got a hugely successful online shop and, people all over the world purchasing your prints. So that's just incredible.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think too it's okay to not be everything to everyone. Mm-hmm. And when I look back at the brand that I contacted, I'm going to leave them nameless. Yeah. But I actually agree that my work was probably not for their customer. Mm-hmm. And I think that was probably correct. And, if your work is not, applicable to someone else's customer, then, that's fine. You can be really niche, and you can find your kind of tribe that do love your work. And I think that, yeah, you just don't have to be everything to everyone. It's almost better to be quite specific, I think, and find the people that really love that and love what you do and wouldn't want something else. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that is absolutely spot on. Did you know that when you first started, in terms of this is my niche, I'm going to stick to more fashion illustrations, or did it sort of just evolve that way?
I think I just painted what I loved, and I love painting in watercolor, and I'm obsessed with a vintage aesthetic, and I love fashion and beauty. And yeah, so I don't think I thought so deeply about it in terms of a market and who this is for. I really did just paint what I loved. But I think if you do have social media and you're an artist, you can get some insight into what your community is responding to, so that it ends up, I think, being a mixture of painting what you love, but also responding to what colors and what themes and what compositions your audience seem to really love. So I think it's a mixture of both that end up being part of everything that I do now.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I'm definitely in that niche, because everyone always teases me about how much pink things I have. So no, you've done an incredible job, and I absolutely love every piece that you bring out. So it's just beautiful. So now you have your masterclass where you're sharing your talents with other people who want to learn how to paint these sort of paintings, and that's just incredible. And you've recently just launched your book, which is super, super exciting. And of course, you're doing your paintings and you've got your clients, and there are so many things happening. So with a rather busy schedule and all of the projects you're working on, what routines and rituals do you do regularly or when you need them to remain focused and not get overwhelmed? And I know you mentioned painting is your form of meditation, but are there any other key things that you know you have to do each day or each week to keep you on track?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to like your personality type, and I know that I'm a bit of an introvert and I'm a real homebody. So I know that I'm happiest when, whilst I love travel, I'm happiest when I'm in a routine at home, and if I get to start my day with a 10-minute stretch, I almost know it's going to be a good day. It just slows down my mind and puts me into a headspace where I just feel like I can handle whatever comes at me today. So if I do that, I always feel great, and I tend to start my day with creative work when I'm feeling my freshest and happiest and most kind of switched on, and then leave administration and emails and, all of that kind of back and forth work for the afternoon when I'm a little bit less creative, a little bit more tired from the whole day. And if I can finish my day with a little stroll, something outside, just some sort of movement or a yoga class, then that is also an ideal way, I think, to end the day. And, really just those little rituals of a bubble bath. If it's been a bad day, I definitely always have a bubble bath. Just because there's something about that. It just puts me in a really good headspace. And then a good book, just those things, cook something delicious, really simple things. And I guess that's really the basis of what the book is about. I guess it's just really, really simple things that end up being the big things that make you feel happy.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, because as this day and age, continues to go on, and you did touch on, you have anxiety, and these things are becoming more and more prevalent the busier that we get and the more touch points that we have and all of these new platforms and everything in our day. Do you have any boundaries around that for yourself? Do you have a team, or do you handle sort of everything?
I don't handle everything. I have a really small business, but some really key people that work with me. Grace, who is sitting next to me, is someone who I am so lucky to have, and she manages everything to do with the online store and deliveries and all of those things, and gives me a chance to focus more on the creative side of the business. But in terms of boundaries, I find really little things like turning my phone off at 8 p.m. And just kind of knowing that you can't get back to absolutely everyone. I really would love to be able to get back to absolutely every DM and every single comment that ever comes out there on all of the platforms. But sometimes you have to give yourself a break and realize that you can't actually do everything. And it's okay to switch off sometimes, and it's okay to have a little break from social media too for a few days. That's actually quite wonderful, because whilst it's such an important part of almost every creative's business, including my own, it is also important to give yourself just a little break from that and just be in the real world and be really present. Because for me, it's definitely being present and just being in the real world that I'm in right then and there that makes me feel the happiest. And I think if you spend too much time on social media, you're kind of in a state of the past or the future rather than right now.
Yeah.
And that can be when you're just not feeling your happiest. And I try and not give too much of my time to my phone. And I think about it that way. If there's times where you've just spent half an hour scrolling on your phone and you don't know even what you did. You don't know where you went, but you know half an hour has passed.
Yeah.
And I just think I probably would have rather gone for a walk, had a bath, or cooked something than spent that time on my phone, if you like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I also don't start my day looking at my phone either. I think that's really important. I try and think about, things that I'm grateful for and things that I'm looking forward to today, rather than looking at emails and looking at social media as the first thing I do. And that's really made a huge difference.
I love that. So you wake up and you take control of your own day, you know, even with starting with your creativity rather than the admin and the emails, you're in control of all of that. Whereas if you start with your phone and emails, you're really in response mode. And that's where I feel like even just for myself, anxiety and things like that come in because you're no longer in control.
Yes. And it starts to feel like your emails are your to-do list rather than what you really need to do, which might be other things. So, yes, I think that's really important.
Yeah, amazing. So many amazing tips and being so raw. Thank you so much. But I do want to chat about, which I am super excited about, your new book, Joy in the Little Things, has just launched this month and my copy is in the mail somewhere on its way. But tell us about the book. Where did the idea come from? And tell us all about it without giving too many spoilers so that people can really enjoy it when they get their hands on their copies.
Yes. Well, it really started out as a kind of fashion and beauty illustrated title. And as I was sketching and writing, I just realized it was moving away from that a little bit as I was going along. It was moving more to those little daily rituals of joy and those little routines and those small moments and I guess gratitude and mindfulness. And I just realized that those things were more important to me than fashion and beauty, although I love fashion and beauty, you know, there's still definitely elements of those things in the book. But I just felt like I felt more about that kind of intangible sense of joy rather than through actual things. So that is really what the book is about. And it started, I guess, with words, and then I would sketch out the things that I was writing about. And I ended up finding that going into kind of blocks of whole days of writing and then whole days of sketching, maybe 3 or 4 days of just painting.
Wow.
There's going to be so many illustrations in this book, around 250. So it's definitely the highest number of illustrations I've ever done for anything. And I just thought the best way for me to do this is to go into a deep creative zone and set everything up and not pack up for a few days and just go into it, because I always find getting started on something is the hardest.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I'm into it, whether that's writing or painting, I can do it. I can really be in the zone and stay in the zone. So that was kind of how it worked. And it started quite a while ago in February 2019. So it's been a two-year process, this book. And we were just kind of wrapping everything up during the pandemic. And the book still felt really relevant. In fact, it probably felt even more relevant because we were literally having to find joy in the little things at home, and all those big glittering shiny moments of overseas travel and big events. Obviously, they just weren't happening. So the book, and still today, the book feels like it's really relevant at the moment because of how we're kind of having to adjust our expectations and what we think of as being really joyful and exciting. I think we've had to kind of change our expectations a little bit. So I think that's kind of come through well in the book and feels really relevant.
Oh, that sounds absolutely incredible, and it is more important than ever, but I think it's just a nice reminder. I mean, it's always been important to find joy in the little things, but I think the last year or so has definitely taught us a few lessons around that. So I think the timing is absolutely perfect, and I cannot wait to read my copy, and I'm sure I'm going to want to put the book all over my walls everywhere. If it's anything like all of your other pieces of art. But congratulations. It's super exciting.
Thank you.
And we will be giving one copy away to one of the listeners of this podcast. If you guys can screenshot this episode, share it to your social media, and tag myself and Kerrie, and you'll go into the running to win the book, which is super exciting.
Lovely.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kerrie, for sharing all of your incredible stories, your journey, and so much valuable tips along the way. It's been an absolute honor to chat to you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was an absolute pleasure interviewing Kerrie on this episode of Couch Chats. I hope you got so much out of that episode. If you did enjoy the episode, don't forget to screenshot and share it to your Instagram stories. Tag myself, Kerrie, and Couch Chats. The info will be in the show notes so that you won't miss a beat. Also, I'll include the link to purchase your very own copy of Kerrie's book in the show notes so that you can give her some love back. But I hope to hear from you guys all soon. Feel free to DM me anytime. Let me know what you think of this podcast episode. It would just mean so much. And make sure you do subscribe because a new episode comes out every Thursday. Speak to you guys soon.